to you today. I intend to resign as party leader, as Prime Minister.
Thank God. But wait, we're not out of the woods yet. What does this mean for the housing market, and what have we seen so far? So I've seen a lot of posts out there talking about the resignation of Justin Trudeau, and we're going to talk about what this means for the housing market. But before we do, let's actually talk about what happened. So far, Trudeau hasn't actually resigned. He's agreed to resign, and only once his party has chosen a new leader, kicking the can down the road.
Trudeau could have chosen to step down immediately and appoint someone else from within the party to take the reins. But what he's doing instead is kicking off a leadership race and staying on as leader and prime minister until his successor is chosen. But it's more complicated than that.
He retains all the powers of a prime minister, which is considerable.
Now, why is this important? Well, it's important for a number of reasons. Number one being that nothing has changed yet, and we are still in a very precarious situation with our housing market. So when it comes to actually trying to predict what this means for our market, I think we're going to have to give this a few months. Currently, as it stands, Parliament is prorogued. Now, what this means for everybody listening is that basically it's being frozen, not sitting. Nothing is going to be happening, and it will stay that way until the end of March.
The only way his party survives long enough to hold a leadership race, because this typically takes months, is for him to put Parliament in stasis.
Prorogation.
Prorogue Parliament.
Prorogation.
Well, Justin Trudeau's argument for why it was necessary to prorogue Parliament was that Parliament is dysfunctional. But if we look at the bigger picture here, Justin Trudeau and the Liberals were likely to face a non-confidence motion.
They were trying to get around the fact that the three opposition parties could gang up on them when the House of Commons came back. They would have been into an election campaign without a leader.
This is definitely the cherry on top that Trudeau has left us. He is basically freezing everything and keeping Canadians in limbo. And this is purely out of self-interest, just so that his party can do a little bit more to protect themselves in the next upcoming election.
Every major party has explicitly stated they would bring down the government and force a snap election as soon as possible.
Leader Yves-François Blanchet says time is up.
We haven't got what we wanted.
Now he says he'll work to bring the government down.
Tonight, the pressure is growing for the Prime Minister with that promise from the NDP to topple the government with a non-confidence vote.
The Conservatives are taking another step towards triggering an election. All opposition parties now saying they're ready to topple the government.
And Parliament was scheduled to return January 27th. So before even a full month of 2025 went by, we all could have been thrown into an election campaign if not for the fact that the Prime Minister has asked the Governor General to prorogue, to suspend Parliament until March 24th. And that request was granted.
And the House will now be prorogued until March 24th.
And by the way, the Liberal media is all saying, well, surely you wouldn't want to trigger an election during the Liberal leadership race. Excuse me, the Canadian people are not obliged, 41 million people are not obliged to wait around while this party sorts out its shit. Mm-hmm. These guys could have got rid of Trudeau a year and a half ago. They knew he was a disaster then. And now they say, well, we're low in the polls, so we have to get rid of him. Now, you didn't care when he was just depriving single mothers of food for their kids, or doubling housing costs, or unleashing crime in neighborhoods across the country. But now you're really concerned about getting rid of him because your poll numbers are down and you want to keep your job. Sorry, that's not a good reason to paralyze the entire country, in the face, by the way, of a major negotiation with the incoming U.S. president, who enters with a massive and powerful mandate, and a man who has proven that he can spot weakness from a mile away. So the country should not be forced to wait for the Liberal Party to clean up its own mess. They've had plenty of time to do that. What we need now is certainty, and the only way that can come is through an election so the people can decide.
His out-of-control spending and inflationary policies have led us into a pretty terrible place. So let's talk about that. Where do we stand right now? In terms of housing, we can clearly see some seasonal trends. December is typically a pretty slow month, and that's exactly what we saw this past December. Sales volume year over year compared to last December was pretty much the same. We saw a slight drop, about 1.8%. But when you look at the actual month over month, so you can actually see what the seasonal effect is, from November to December, sales volume dropped 18.7%. This is expected. And because we saw such a steep drop in sales volume, well, price just didn't really move. Average selling price month over month was almost no change. It was down 0.2%. And year over year, also very little change, only down 1.6%. Something that I think we should note, though, is that when we look at this December compared to last December, we did see a lot more new listings hitting the market. Total new listings were up 20% compared to December of 2023. And the sales to new listings ratio was down 16%, meaning that we had more new listings and less sales as a ratio. And as expected, during the holiday season where a lot less sales are happening, we saw a very hefty number for days on market. Average days on market was 56 in December, which is up year over year by 14.3%. So sales volume has absolutely been decimated. I think we're probably seeing the absolute gully of the gullies when it comes to that. And you can see that represented in this graph right here. We are well below the correction in sales volume that we saw after Q1 of 2017, which we did see a big adjustment there, but this is way more pronounced. So obviously the housing market is not in great shape, and that's definitely thanks to the roller coaster we've seen under Trudeau's policies and spending. If you just look at the home price index, you can see two major spikes over the last 25 years. Both were during Justin Trudeau's time in office. One was in 2017 and one was during the pandemic. But the time that it's taking to recover this time around is nothing like last time. We are seeing bigger swings, more volatility, and a lot more consumer risk. And it's because of inflation. Now, when we look at inflation right now, the number may look pretty small, but that's because we're measuring year over year. What we should be doing is looking at inflation over the last 4 years, which is why everybody's so upset. I saw a really cool clip on this. This was pertaining to England, but we're basically in the same boat. And this really shows it.
That's the cost of living crisis. Suddenly we went up from prices being around there to prices being there. And you don't really see that in this data, okay? Because inflation is really just measuring the difference between that and that. And if you look at those two lines, you're talking about a 2.3% change. That's the number we're talking about today. But for a lot of people, it's not about that. It's about the difference between this and that. And when you look at the difference between this and that, that's 20%. And I think that's the dichotomy here between these inflation numbers where it looks normal and this, which is really not normal at all.
And we shouldn't be surprised. In fact, Stephen Harper, right before he left office, was warning us that this would happen.
Those deficits will not be small. Mr. Trudeau has made tens of billions of dollars of spending promises. He said the budget will balance itself. He has no idea what he is talking about when it comes to these things. That's why you could be sure that his small deficits will become large deficits and would get Canada into the same pickle of high taxes and program cuts that we had under the last Liberal government.
So while I'm sure we're all glad to see Trudeau go, we still have a ways to go until we see any meaningful change in our market. So I'm definitely telling all of my clients right now to sit tight. This is still going to be a pretty slow Q1. But hey, that's just what I think. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Thanks so much for tuning in again, and I'll see you next time.